And Senator Roblan and Gabriella, you want to kick us off here? And Beth, you want to give us a brief summary?
Senate Bill 319 requires proprietary authorization and a removal fill permit from the Department of State Lands to construct or operate ocean renewable energy facility in Oregon's Territorial Sea. There's a -3 amendment on OLIS that would remove a section from the bill establishing the policy of the state and requires that DSL convene a committee to assist in evaluating whether to establish a general permit or general authorization.
All right.
Thank you, Chair Edwards and committee. For the record, Arnie Roblan, Senator from District 5. This bill originated out of conversations a number of years ago, and 2 years in particular, when we came to the conclusion that putting a wave energy device in the ocean had to get a permit from Water Resources and a water right. And since it made no sense to me that we had water rights in the ocean because of the plentifulness of water in the ocean, that we needed to have some other ability to regulate the introduction of those devices into our near shore. And so we looked around and we had some conversations, and we finally came back to Division of State Lands and the idea that how could we get a regulatory handle to help when somebody wants to put a device in the ocean, to have that regulatory hook into whoever it is, so that we can make sure that they remove it if they are going to go away, that they do it the way we think they should, and so that we can put parameters around how they install those devices in the ocean. We've had some bills that come through that have explained some of that information, but who is going to be the regulatory or person to handle that? After the discussions, we came to the conclusion that DSL was the place and that removal fill was the opportunity. And as we built the original bill and put it out there for people to look at, we started getting a lot of conversations around it. And in particular, Section 2, which was really the section that's being removed. So I convened a little work group to talk about it with some fishermen and with energy people, and we came up with the first attempt, which was number 1. That did not meet the requirements that everybody had set forth to basically do no harm and to make it happen right. So we went to number 2. Number 2 created some other issues that we got information back from both people, so we decided we could go to 3. So amendment number 3 is the attempt that I think came to the conclusion that everybody could agree to. It basically allows us to have the requirement to put DSL in the driver's seat with respect to the ability to regulate this new industry. It took a water right out and replaced it with the idea that you're going to have removal fill, because when you put it in the ocean, you're going to do something. The conversation had got a little bit more interesting when we started talking about these devices that only go in for 6 months or a year to do testing. And we have a couple places on the Oregon coast, Newport being the number 1, where we have PMAC, and then out farther, NIMREC, which actually are testing buoys that allow people to come out and test their particular devices. And we didn't really want to get in the way of that. We really wanted to figure out, could there be an expedited way to figure out how to get them in the ocean for those short periods of times. And we realized that as on land, when you do a removal fill permit, if you're doing less than 50 yards of material, there's a general permit you can get, which is much easier to get than going through the whole process that you have to do for removal fill. That became a conversation, and in the bill you will see the stuff that we entered into allows for a process which would allow fishing interests and other wave energy device interests and the state to come together to come up with some rules on how do we write that removal fill permit that's a general permit that would allow us to do the research that we think is really important on the coast. And we think for the foreseeable future it's probably where we're going to spend most of our time in this business, because we would love to be the place where people come and make devices and send them off all over the world, helping them find their energy. And I think what we've come to agree with is that we've had fishermen engaged in where that research will take place. We're moving forward on some of that stuff. We wanted to make sure that we came up with a process that allowed that to happen and still gave us the regulatory authority of the state to encourage them to do it right. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gabriella. Thank you and she was one of the people who was in the work group that always was there to help.
Great, thank you, Senator Roblan. Good afternoon, Chair Edwards and Vice Chair Olson and members of the committee. I'm Gabriela Goldfarb with Governor Kate Brown's office, and I'm here testifying in support of SB 319, sponsored by Senator Roblan and his colleagues in the Coastal Caucus. And Senator Roblan really covered very robustly many of the aspects that I was going to talk about, so I will try and shorten my comments to just give you a flavor of the context for why all of this came about. And I have to make a bit of a detour into the federal landscape regulating ocean energy. So under federal law, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, has preemptive authority to regulate what they call hydrokinetic energy projects, and that means projects that generate electricity from waves or directly from the flow of water in ocean currents, tides, or inland waterways. And that locus of federal authority resulted in FERC issuing a ream of preliminary permits in Oregon's territorial sea in the mid-2000s without the state having much or any of a role. And the state had to respond quickly. We settled on the Water Resources Department's authority to issue water rights and hydroelectric licenses, and that appeared to be the best mechanism that we could get quickly into place to ensure that the state would have a seat at the table. And so in other words, we directly imported the regime that we have for river hydroelectric projects and plopped it in the ocean. And this was an awkward fit, as Senator Roblan alluded. It makes sense that you need to allocate the finite resources of water resources of a river with a water right and a hydroelectric license, but it doesn't make sense in the ocean. So the rush by the wave energy developers to lay claims to the state waters prompted the state to amend the territorial sea plan to set policies and a spatial plan for ocean energy development in state waters. And it put the Department of State Lands, rather than the Water Resources Department, in the role of lead agency. We completed that plan in 2013. We submitted it to FERC for approval as a comprehensive plan, and we got that approval, and now FERC now has to consider that plan in its licensing process. But more significant from a legally binding perspective is that we were also able to seek and to obtain approval from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, to make the plan part of our federally approved coastal management plan. And under federal law, if something is part of an enforceable policy as part of our federally approved plan, we get something called Federal Consistency Review Authority, and that requires that any action the federal government takes that affects our ocean or coastal resources has to be consistent with our approved policies. And so the kind of the final step to getting us this strong voice at the table, which is captured in this bill, it makes, for the most part, what are technical changes to Department of State Lands' existing authorities to be consistent with the Territorial Sea Plan and how DSL implements its regulatory removal fill authority and its proprietary or landlord type authorization for this emerging clean energy use. It effectively removes the Water Resources Department and the water right from the process, except in extremely narrow circumstance, and it provides statutory recognition, your authorization of DSL's role as the lead agency. And I will leave it at that, and if there are more nuances to the bill, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I have agency folks in the room as well to help me out when I can't answer them. So thank you for your time and attention.
Senator Olson, just one.
The necessity of the emergency clause.
We have, from my perspective, we have groups and people who are out there already testing devices. We've already had one problem where they didn't get the permit before they got the stuff in and before they got it back out because it was just to test it. And so it has resulted in some miscues along the way in the last couple of years, which I think could be prevented if we could have a process that makes sense to everybody. And so they get the permit before they put it in the water, and then they have to get the permit to take it out, and they've already done both before stuff gets done. Hopefully this will allow that to happen, especially for the test things. That's where I think the most likelihood is that we're going to have buoys and stuff out in the water.
And we don't need that 8 to 10 month gap.
Correct.
Thank you.
So does the department currently have authority to do this? They currently have authority.
Yes, they are the
Well-
land, excuse me.
They have the authority to do more removal fill kind of permits.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't applied it to this particular industry before, have we?
If I may, so Chair Edwards and committee members, so DSL as the landlord for our submerged lands has had the removal fill authority and also the proprietary use authorization. In other words, charging somebody rent and making conditions as a landlord. But the way that was all set up in statute was not quite aligned with what we adopted in the Territorial Sea Plan and the policies there relating to this new use, because their program didn't contemplate ocean energy. So there's a lot of technical fixes. That's why it is such a long bill, because it's amending all these particular parts of their existing, authorities and program to tweak it to make it work for ocean energy.
And there was also, I wouldn't say a conflict, but some of the regulating authority was in water resources as opposed to DSL because of this water right issue that didn't make a lot of sense.
So, Chair Edwards and members of the committee, the way it worked is that Water Resources was the convening authority and had to issue a water right and had to go through all this administrative stuff and spend resources that really weren't necessary. They had to convene all the other agencies, including DSL, but DSL was really the one who was carrying out most of the work. And so this new regime acknowledges that reality and takes Water Resources out of the mix.
Okay. Questions? Great. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Signed up, we have Terry Thompson and Ono Husing. I apologize if I did not pronounce your name correctly.
That's not the first time.
Well, actually,
That's my guess.
I think you meant Thompson, Captain Sensitivity.
Oh, man. Terry Thompson, past state representative and now Lincoln County Commissioner, and been involved in the fishing industry. First of all, let me say that I want to thank Arnie, Roblan, and his staff and the governor's office for working out this bill. The original bill had us concerned, and the -3 amendments makes a bill that we think is a good bill. So it's nice to be able to come up here and support this bill. The only thing that even worries us a little bit is the committee that's formed under Section 14. Like any committee, it's always difficult. We worry that there'll be a balanced committee, but we have to trust that when it's created, it will be a fair committee, so all parties will be there and represented. But we support the bill.
The pronunciation is Ono Husing, and I'm the director of the Lincoln County Planning and Development Department.
I
Terry
got
Thompson.
them both wrong. Not Ono Husing.
Oh, I've heard some
Husing or Husing?
Husing.
Husing.
I've heard some real doozies over my life, so you actually, that was pretty good. So just pleasure to be here. I'm Terry Thompson's chauffeur today because you heard his arm hauling a bucket of herring, right? You were talking about...
No, don't start with the war story. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I can only go so far.
How many herring did you catch last
Yeah,
weekend?
get to the point.
I have nothing further to add. I just want to add the very good collaborative effort and thank you. And in the future, if you deal with these issues, please make sure you get a bunch of opinions, because trying to make the Territorial Sea Plan work and these new energy issues, it's very complicated and nuanced, and there are a lot of different views. And so we look forward to helping you in the future if there are any further issues on this matter, to help you understand that it is complicated and a number of different people need to be involved. Thank you.
All right. I do have a question. Yeah. Several years ago, or a couple years ago, we talked about ocean reserves. Does this impact ocean reserves?
Marine reserves, you mean?
Marine reserves, yeah. Does it intertwine with them, or?
Not this bill directly, no. Marine reserves is another issue I'd love to sit down and talk to you about any
Please
time.
don't, please don't.
But now's not the
In your
time.
office.
This bill
Now
is
is
just
not
fine
the
the way it
time.
is. Let's pass it.
No, I just thought about the marine reserves we have, and now we have this in there, and I wondered if there was an interconnect, or if these are far from the marine reserves.
They are an interconnect in that they're creating, as we create these different zones in the ocean, it reduces the amount of productive food production that's capable from the ocean. Now, some people will say that that doesn't necessarily so because the fish are protected when you make spatial planning. But as you add more and more things into spatial planning, eventually it will reduce the amount of capabilities of harvestable areas in the ocean.
That's exactly the question I wanted to ask. Thank you.
He's talked about this before. Any other questions?
I know better.
Thank you both. Is there anybody else that would like to